Good morning, everyone. Pennies for everyone's thoughts this morning as we tackle a headline that's been discussed for a while, but came to a head last week in the final pennies being minted at the U.S. Mint after a whole discussion as to their utility, their purpose, their cost, their expense, and the like. And we're going to discuss a couple items relating to the penny, but also the idea of currency and the smallest currency. And I guess the Jewish equivalent of the penny, the Perutah, which we'll cover from its halachic perspective, its use in Jewish law. So the penny and the Perutah, we get underway. Source number one from the AP last week. The U.S. ended production of the penny Wednesday, abandoning the 1-cent coins that were embedded in American culture for more than 230 years, but became nearly worthless. When it was introduced in 1793, a penny could buy a biscuit, a candle, or a piece of candy. Now, most of them are cast aside to sit in jars or junk drawers, and each one costs nearly 4 cents to make. Billions of pennies are still in circulation and will remain legal tender, but new ones will no longer be made. Still, many Americans have a nostalgia for them, seeing pennies as lucky or fun to collect. And some retailers voiced concern in recent weeks as supplies ran low and the end of production drew near. They said the phase-out was abrupt and came with no government guidance on how to handle transactions. Some businesses rounded prices down to avoid shortchanging shoppers. Others pleaded with customers to bring exact change. The more creative among them gave out prizes such as a free drink in exchange for a pile of pennies. Pennies cost far less to produce than the nickel, which cost nearly 14 cents to make. The diminutive dime, by comparison, cost less than 6 cents to produce, a bargain. The quarter, nearly 15 cents. So the penny, I thought maybe to look up the origins of the penny loafer as part of this, but it got sidetracked. The idea of a penny having a few items notable from here. One, the penny costs 4 cents. So it's legal tender as 1 cent, but it costs 4 cents. How do we evaluate the penny from a halachic perspective? Also, this idea in terms of transactions, right? I'm sure, you go to the gas station, you see that gas costs $2.98. Wow. But it's not really $2.98. It's $2.98.9, right? It's always, $2.98 and 9/10 of a penny. And this whole rounding up, rounding down has an issue with regards to certain laws, because, for example, certain cash transaction laws, you can't charge more for cash. So something costs $3.77, you can't round it up to $3.80. You have to go down to $3.75. Also, there's certain rules with certain government programs. We heard about the food assistance program SNAP in the news lately after the government shutdown. There's certain laws with regards to how much can be paid for purchases with that type of an assistance. And so for you or me individually, it means nothing, but multiply it by 300 million Americans, and we're talking about significant amounts of money that could also impact various, the validity of transactions and the like. So it's that's the headache that the article is referencing. And then there was an article just the other day about the last U.S. pennies could fetch up to $5 million after the mint shuts down. Final U.S. penny struck this week might be worth a fortune. Coin experts estimate that the last pennies minted Wednesday could sell for as much as $5 million each when they hit the auction block in December. Not everyone's that optimistic. Mike Fulhans, the president of Universal Coin and Bullion in Beaumont, Texas, told USA Today he thinks the final penny that was struck could bring up to $1 million. The second and third final coins might fetch $10,000 and $20,000, he told USA Today. I don't know if anyone here is ever a coin collector. I took over my father's coin collection. You have those kind of cardboard folders that have little slots for the coins in them. And you have that potential that the penny could be worth a lot more than its legal tender value. And that, too, becomes part of the question for how much is a penny worth. Talk about a penny for your thoughts. It could be a lot more than a penny. It might be $5 million for your thoughts. If it goes, or even $1 million, you know what? I'd settle for $10,000 or $20,000 too. So there's this idea of the penny. So when we talk about Jewish currency, we talk about the Perutah. The Perutah comes from the Hebrew word prat, which means detail. Is this idea of the smallest amount of value. And when we talk about certain transactions or purchases or acquisitions in Jewish law, we talk about something being shaveh Perutah, something being worth a Perutah. So how much is that Perutah? So source number 3, in an article about the value of a Perutah, the Perutah was the smallest form of currency in the times of the Mishnah and Talmud. It was a copper coin, penny. The whole idea of Perutah as a penny very much associates with the Perutah being a copper coin. Its silver worth is the weight of half a barley grain, which is about 0.025 grams. Thus, the worth of a Perutah is 0.025 of 1 gram of silver, 1/40th of a gram. In accordance to the current prices of silver, which was in 2024, the worth of a Perutah is 1.8 cents. Furthermore, some poskim question that perhaps a Perutah must contain an amount that one can use to purchase a substantial item in one's country, such as many fruits. And thus the above mentioned minuscule amount is no longer accurate for today's times. So there's the idea of it's a certain amount, the value of a weight of silver, or it has to be able to purchase something. Now, just, that article is from 2024. The price of 1 gram of silver yesterday was $1.64, right? These commodities are up. Gold, silver, the prices have gone up a lot. And therefore, the Perutah value is now up to 4.1 cents. One of them, as opposed, so you can see even in just, a year and a half, the value of the Perutah has doubled. But the Rabbi Goldstein points out there's 2 aspects. It's the value of the weight of silver, but there is this idea that the Perutah has to buy something. And we see that, we'll see that in source number 4. There's an opinion that since nowadays the penny doesn't purchase anything, then a Perutah is not enough. So, for example, we mentioned in the article in the history that once there was a time you could buy penny candy. Well, if you can't buy Perutah candy, if your Perutah buys you nothing, then maybe the Perutah doesn't have value. So we have this idea that has to be shaveh Perutah, and there's definitely it's worth something. But if it doesn't have value to be able to allow you to purchase something, maybe the Perutah is not significant and doesn't count at all. And in particular, this comes up with maybe the time when you've encountered the Perutah in the past has to do with getting married. We talk about that a woman gets married when the husband gives her something of value. And nowadays we use a ring, and that certainly would seem to be worth something of value. And you may hear a rabbi, if it's a chuppah where they're giving some instructions that you could hear while watching it. The rabbi may hold the ring and ask the groom, "Did you buy this with your own money?" May ask the bride if she's willing to accept it as is. And there may be the question of showing it to the witnesses, saying, "Does this look like it's shaveh Perutah? Does this look like it's worth a Perutah?" Now, how much is a shaveh Perutah? On the one hand, it's like a penny, but we saw that its value has to be that of at least 4 cents or so. So, sometimes there's kind of the tongue-in-cheek. It looks like at least it's worth a quarter, but we see from that, from source number 4, from the Shach quoting the Sma, that maybe that's not enough. If its worth is not something that would allow you to purchase something, then maybe the Perutah's value is insignificant. And the likelihood is the ring that the chassan is giving the kala, the groom gives the bride, is probably worth, at least $1. And you can certainly, you can go to the 99-cent store, you can purchase something. But it does seem that the Perutah is challenged in terms of, just like the penny is now being phased out, it could be that the Perutah has a certain worth based on the price of silver, but its value as a legal tender amount has been compromised, because what can you buy anymore with 4 cents or 5 cents and the like? Maybe you have to give a dime, and as we, but a dime is 10 cents legal tender, but it's only worth 6 cents. But so you have the nickel is worth 14 cents. So there's this idea that just like the penny has become obsolete, we may be encountering a situation that the Perutah is no longer helpful because it's not, even though it has a certain value, it's worth a certain amount based on the weight of silver, it can't be used for anything. And how much it's worth is relevant. And just like we saw that the value of a Perutah has gone up in the last 17 months, even doubled, that could actually be relevant in terms of if something was given the groom gives the bride a certain something, a coin, a ring, and what if that value changes? So source number 6 has a question that was asked already back in the 15th century. If someone presented, the groom presented the bride with a certain object, and that object was not worth a Perutah, but he didn't put it in her hand, he put it in front of her. The example is he threw something towards her, and it lands at her feet, and it's not worth a Perutah. And by the time she picks it up, the price of silver spikes, and now it's worth a Perutah. What's the situation? Is she married or not? The man gave the woman, presented the woman with an object. When he gave it to her, it was worth less than a Perutah, and when she picks it up, it's worth more than a Perutah. Or what if the other way around? Let's say the price of silver plummets, and by the time she picks it up, it's worth less than a Perutah. So where do we follow the giving or her receiving? And so the Radvaz answers, end of source number 6, Hadavar barur debasar di da azlina. It all depends on her, right? The marriage is really only looked at as being finalized once it talks about when it gets to her hand. Whatever it's worth when she picks it up or the object is on her hand, that makes all the difference. And it again points out the complexity of the Perutah, especially if we factor in the fact that it might not be able to be used if it doesn't have any purchase power. But when it comes to its value, and that value can shift, how that impacts, it could very much impact the status of a woman being married or not, depending on how much the object was worth at the moment she picked it up, if it went above the value of the Perutah or below the value of the Perutah. So we have the penny being phased out. We have the Perutah being related as the smallest amount of currency, and how that actually is not only about what it's worth, but its value. Stop for any questions, comments, or reactions before we look at a couple other Perutah situations or phase outs in Jewish law.
Yeah, Rabbi, where does the shekel come into play in this discussion?
Okay.
And also, not worth a dime, I believe, is the idiomatic expression. Continue.
Okay. All right. It could be because, a penny for your thoughts is really not worth anything. But if it's worth a dime, then it counts for something.
Or penny wise and pound foolish.
That's right. Okay, but if the penny's not worth very much, it's kind of like you are what you eat, so your wisdom is what it's worth. Or maybe that's the example for what a penny for your thoughts for what it's worth. We're gonna have we can have a punny class all day long. So just to Al's question about in particular this the shekel. So there is when we talk about Jewish currency, the Torah does talk about the shekel and the half shekel, and talks about it being worth certain amounts of silver. They talk about it being worth 5 silver coins, is one of the examples used. But when it comes to the idea of the Perutah, the Perutah would be worth less than that, because it's certainly the smallest amount of silver. That's a barley's grain amount of silver, which we saw was calculated to be about 1/40th of a gram. And other coinage and currency is built upon that in terms of how much silver and how much a silver is worth and the like. For example, you talk about the 5 silver dollars that are used for the Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn. There too, there's a currency question. What kind of coins? Is it the amount of silver, or is it the idea of using, for example, if it's 5 coins, is it 5 coins that have the weight of silver of the shekel biblically, or can you use 5 silver dollars? They even talk about, for example, the commemoration of the half shekel collection that was taken in the times of the temple, which is remembered before Purim. Right? So you'll sometimes see before Purim having a zecher lemachtis hashekel. People have a custom to give symbolically the half shekel coin. Well, what is the half shekel coin? Does it have to be a certain amount of a coinage that's worth a certain amount of the price of silver, or can you use a $50? Right? I would imagine some of you have seen in synagogues before Purim in the basket they have this machzis hashekel, give the half shekel, and they will have three $50 taped together, and that has to do with the custom of using three coins of the country's currency of half the standard currency. So whatever it is, if it's ruble, if it's zloty, if it's dollar, you take the $50 coin, and then the custom has been to multiply it by three, to use three just to cover all the bases, and that's what you find. It's kind of, it's like, how old is the Scotch tape around the $50 coins? It's also complicated because they don't make $50 coins anymore. It's kind of, although I've seen more $2 bills, I think they started printing a few more. But how do you do it? How do you have this practice if let's say the coins aren't used? And then we get into the same question. It's legal tender for a certain amount, but it's worth another amount. So in general, it seems that this idea that we saw mentioned by the Shach in source number 4, that we've tried to move away from the looking at the minimum value of the Perutah, or how much the Perutah is worth, by looking at the purchase power of the smallest amount and wanting that to be utilized, especially in momentous transactions like when the husband gives the wife a ring and such.
There's a famous movie, Three Coins in the Fountain. Great movie.
All right, I'll have to look for that.
Oh, it's great.
Every turn presents a challenge.
So,
Don't guess.
so let's look at a couple other practical applications with regards to the Perutah. So when we sell chametz, we generally authorize the rabbi to sell chametz on our behalf. Part of the sale of the chametz is the rabbi sells the chametz to a non-Jew. The non-Jew purchases it with money. How much money does it have to be? So usually it's a down payment, but how much does that down payment have to include? So the question is that there have to be a Perutah for every person selling the chametz. And so what does that mean? What is the Perutah? We saw that the value of the Perutah now might be around 4 cents. When a lot of this was discussed, you see it's discussed by Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Back in the day, it was a penny. So, so how does this play out? So when one sells his chametz to a non-Jew, the non-Jew needs to give at least a Perutah. How many Perutos are needed for such a sale? So Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, one of the rabbi of Kovna, at the turn of the 20th century, writes that technically speaking, the non-Jew should give at least 1 Perutah for each seller, because a kinyan kesef, a monetary acquisition, needs to have at least 1 Perutah per seller. Rav Moshe Feinstein also writes that 1 Perutah must be given for each seller. Rav Shmuel Wozner says it actually needs to be 2 Perutahs, 1 for the chametz and one for the area, the karka, the land sale that goes along with the chametz sale. Still, the common custom is not to be stringent on this. The bottom line is that ideally, lechatchila, there should be 1 Perutah for each seller, but the evid is okay even if there is not. So it seems that in terms of the way the chametz is sold, we're not really so particular in terms of how much the down payment costs, because at least with the evid, it's fine. But if you want to be careful that there be a Perutah for each purchaser, well, then you have to be careful what that down payment is going to be. So, for example, if we're talking about if the non-Jew gives $1 as a down payment, these days that only works for 25. Right? If a Perutah is worth 4 cents, it only works for 25 purchasers. If there's 250 purchasers, that doesn't work. So you see that the value of the Perutah can have an impact here. From a practical purpose, you don't necessarily have to question your rabbi how much he accepts as a down payment, because if you rely upon the rabbi to sell the chametz, you're good either way. If anyone's interested in knowing, I have a Perutah for cover the purchasers. Thankfully, I don't have 10,000 purchasers, but you can imagine there are sometimes such chametz sales that take place where many rabbis come together and they do kind of a common or a more broader mechira this would become relevant in terms of how much the non-Jew gives in cash to purchase the chametz. If you have 1,000 purchasers, right, you need it. How much is that? You'll have to have at least $440, right? Is that right? Hirsch, you can check my math. 4 cents times 1,000. So it technically can add up. But, so that's the idea that where the Perutah can become relevant, not only in the marriage situation, but also in the sale of chametz situation. What about when we talk about in terms of how we value things, in terms of how we, what about if you steal less than a Perutah? So the Tosfot in Kedushin has a comment that something worth less than a Perutah isn't called money. It has no value. It's almost the idea that, so even though a Perutah could be worth 4 cents, it's not called money. But the Rambam adds a layer that it's not just about the value. There's a certain ethical and moral component to this as well. The Rambam, source number 9, it is forbidden to rob even the slightest amount. It's forbidden to even to rob or to withhold money from a Gentile who worships idols. If one robs or withholds money from such a person, one must return it. This idea that, sometimes things, a Perutah has value. So if you steal less than a Perutah, right? According to this, if you steal 3 cents, you haven't stolen, because less than a Perutah is not money. The Rambam says you can't look at things like this, because our relationship with others, both in terms of respecting their property, in terms of recognizing that it's theirs and you can't take it, or to return lost property, is something that is not only about it's not only about the worth. It's really about values with a capital V. When this comes, what about returning lost objects? So Rabbi Daniel Newstead addresses this in source number 10. The lost object must be worth more than a Perutah in order for the mitzvah to apply. If an odd glove, shoe, or rubber is found, one is still obligated to return it, even though it is worthless by itself, since it has value to the owner who has the other one. There's no obligation to return an item, even if it is worth a Perutah. If it is clearly insignificant, the owner doesn't care about it, like a used tissue or something. Certainly, one need not return an object which has obviously been abandoned by its owner, is found lying in the street. So there's the idea, the standard laws of returning lost objects. There's certain categories. If something has a symbol, has a name, of course it has to be returned. If something has absolutely no identifying marker, you can assume at some point that the person has given up hope. But there's recognition that something which would seem to have no value, right, like a stray rubber glove or shoe, or some object which would seem to have be less than 4 cents, but doesn't have to be returned. But the idea of what it's technically worth isn't necessarily what its value is, because there's a certain sentimental value which actually is quantified in Jewish law. And so this idea of something needing to have a certain monetary value, like in the situation of marriage and what it has to, the value of the ring from the husband to the wife, or when we're talking about where certain value has to be attached in terms of maybe the purchase of chametz, where it does make a difference. Sometimes if it's quote unquote worthless, it still has value, and that has to do both with returning lost objects and in terms of respecting people's property. There's no such thing as just stealing a tiny amount, even if it's worthless. It's not technically actionable from a judicial point of view, but as the Rambam points out, it's still something that has that is part of our morals and our values. And this is something that Rabbi Eliezer Melamed talks about in source number 11. He talks about mitzad hadin, from the letter of the law. These categories have certain leniencies. Midas chasidus lahachmir kishe'efshar. Right, the way of the pious person should strive to treat these things and not to use other people's objects. Or he said not to just like take a match. He says lo be'et o gafur. Don't kind of think that their pen is worthless or that a match is just a little match. The lo rishus mefureshes, you should always ask permission. It's about respecting things. I think these are our values, even with things, with objects that have very little value. So that's in terms of not only things, purchases and technical transactions where the Perutah is relevant, but it is a reminder that even without the significant worth, we are sensitive to respecting and returning objects regardless of their Perutah value and worth. Questions or comments?
I believe, Rabbi, that the dollar is the most valuable currency in the world based on the strength of the American economy. Would you agree?
Come on. You follow the American economy far more closely than I do, Al, and so I would concur. But as we're seeing, it's not only about value; it's about values, and that takes us to one of the areas where the Perutah or the penny has always been in my consciousness has to do with giving tzedakah, charity. Right? We give charity, and it was always put a penny in the pushka, and even the idea of putting just one small coin, it's small amount, it became very part of my upbringing was always put a penny in the pushka. People have a practice giving charity before lighting candles on Friday, before Shabbos. You put a couple of coins in, the JNF charity boxes, things of that sort. It's built into this idea of giving tzedakah, and sometimes even just a penny. And I remember when we would do the kaparas ceremony between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There's the idea of it's associated often with swinging the chickens. People use money if they don't have a live chicken handy. Frozen chickens don't work. But I remember we were always taught to participate in this mitzvah by bringing tzedakah into school, and it was always and somehow the amount that we were told to bring in 18 cents. Chai, it's a nice amount. So I remember people would bring in 18 cents in a little plastic bag. You bring in 18 pennies. That's how you give it exactly 18 cents. Maybe you bring in a dime, a nickel, and 3 pennies, whatever it was. If you were lazy, you just brought a quarter. Now, it's also more generous, but there's this idea that, that when it comes to charity, the smaller, steady amounts have significance. And in fact, the Gemara in Baba Basra makes mention of this type of an idea. Kol Perutah u'Perutah mitztarefes lecheshbon gadol. Each and every Perutah combines to form a great sum. Right? You build a charitable legacy, even each and every coin. I still remember a rabbi telling the story that in the family they would always encourage giving tzedakah, and the children would always see putting money in the pushka. One day he gets home and his little daughter is playing with his wallet, and he gets a little concerned. What happened with everything? His cards, his license, and stuff. And he takes the wallet back and sees that his ID and his cards are all there, but the cash isn't there. And she's like, what happened? She's like, oh, that paper, I just threw it out, because she was used to money being the money that went into the pushka, the coins. So maybe financial literacy is something that requires us to move beyond just coins, and certainly giving dollar bills or paper money is great in charity as well. But every small amount counts.
In third and fourth grade, we had bank books, and we did very small increments, and they taught us, how to save. It wasn't just tzedakah, but it was a sense of self-worth,
Right. Just make sure, even if you're doing small amounts, make sure they know that the bigger denominations of money are also worth keeping track of. But this idea of what about charity in a Perutah, right? There's also kind of a mitzvah to give tzedakah. So what if you give these days, if you put a penny in the pushka, is that tzedakah? Because it's pachos mishava Perutah. 1 penny is not worth the requisite amount. Like we said, you need to give about 4 cents. So do we have to up our game? So source number 13, Rabbi Shimon Taub in the book Laws of Tzedakah and Maser. Generally in halacha, money which is worth less than a shava Perutah is not considered money, as we saw previously. Shava Perutah is the amount of money equal to the value of the smallest coin used in Talmudic times. This is not the case with regard to tzedakah. One can fulfill the mitzvah even though he is giving less than shava Perutah, as long as the total amount of what he gives throughout the year adds up to a minimum of a third of a shekel, so it has to reach a certain larger amount. So when it comes to tzedakah, that teaching in the Gemara and Baba Basra of each and every Perutah combines even applies less than a shava pruta. So you can give your 1 cent a day, which will add up to $3.65 over the course of the year. It all is mitzarefes. It all counts towards the mitzvah of tzedakah, which is this idea, whether it be in charity or in mitzvahs or in values, that every little bit counts, and can be a powerful lesson, which may relate to a Talmud a Talmudic teaching in Sanhedrin. This is one that was made its way in different articles, and those being passed around social media when the end of the penny was announced, because the Talmud says, "Ein ben David ba ad shetichla pruta min hakis." Messiah will not come until the pruta will cease from the purse, or we could say the Messiah will not come until the pennies are taken out of the pockets. And all of a sudden, now there's no more pennies. Well, they're not going to be printed anymore, so maybe we're getting closer to the Messianic era. Yes, Phyllis.
I just wanted to make a few observations. Rosie, I definitely remember the savings banks. And in fact, the importance of the penny was such that the name of the bank that we saved in Brooklyn was the Lincoln Savings Bank. And I do remember collecting all my pennies, even as an adult, wrapping them up in paper, and then writing a check for tzedakah with all those pennies and depositing them in the bank. And saving shiny pennies. And the other thing that has nothing to do with this, but I guess it does, the subway had chocolate machines, the subway platforms. Anyone remember the Souchard chocolate for a penny? Anyone? No? Well,
We'll take your word for it.
It was delicious.
So no, but there's the idea. Once upon a time, as we saw earlier, the idea of a pruta has to have purchase power. So penny had purchase power that made it more in line with the pruta. But here we have this idea that once we stop using pennies, maybe Mashiach will come, or once we have no more prutas. And what does that mean? We have no more prutas. And is it about that we don't have the smaller valued amounts of things? What does this mean? So an article about the subject, this came out, was an article in the Jewish Link back in February when the conversations were started with regards to this. The sages teach in Sanhedrin, Mashiach son of David will not come until the small coin disappears from the pocket. Classic commentaries like Rashi, Maharal, and the Vilna Gaon interpret this as an indication of financial hardship, economic instability, even the erosion of kindness, right? When you don't have maybe you don't even have a penny to your name, or you don't have a penny to give. Others, like Rabbeinu Bachi and the Chazon Ish, a few take a more literal view. The disappearance of small change is a sign of redemption. And this is definitely something. In Israel, they've been getting rid of the agorot, right? They used to have a 1 and a 5 and a 10, and now they've just started rounding down or rounding up when they give change. So there's this idea that when the Talmud mentions this concept of no more pruta, either it's a sign that unfortunately there will be more poverty and less generosity because you don't have that small coin to your name to either use or give, or, all right, we get rid of the small change. It's a sign of redemption. I'm not sure how that relates to maybe the rise of crypto. We have to, I'm sure that will be kind of in discussion too at some point, but that's how we understand that statement from the Talmud. So then you have...
Does anybody else remember the Dime Savings Bank besides me?
I've heard the name. Do they still exist?
Yes, I do. I remember it.
I think they changed the name to the Quarter Savings Bank because of inflation.
Bad.
We used that bank for years.
Yes.
That's not so long ago, actually.
Right. It just changed recently. If it did.
Right.
So you have Rabbi Norman Lamb actually gave a sermon on this subject, on this statement of the Talmud back in 1961. Back then, a penny probably was a pruta. But he talks about the Hasidic interpretation to this Talmudic teaching. Source 16, the great Hasidic teacher, the Vorker Rebbe, interpreted that passage in a manner which, while fanciful rather than literal, provides us with a deep insight into all aspects of life. The word pruta, which means the smallest coin, a penny, is derived from the word prat, meaning a small detail. Pratiut, detailism, the tendency to break everything down into small pieces, into the prat, and to fail to see the whole picture is one of the things that prevents the Messiah from coming. Pratiut is fragmentation, the inclination towards personal and collective isolation, the spirit of divisiveness and disunity. Messiah will only come when pratiut ends, and in its place comes the opposite, klaliut, the tendency to think in terms of the klal, the community, the whole picture, the total view. When man will increase the breadth of his vision and grow beyond pratiut, beyond the confining limitations which make him think small, act small, be small, when he will be the man of klaliut, of wholeness, of wholesomeness, then Messiah will come. So maybe the idea of the Messiah will come when we get rid of the Perutah, we get rid of the small-mindedness, the narrow vision, the inner focus more inwardly, and when we can be more outward, more expansive. That's how Rabbi Lamb explains this based on the teaching of the Vorka Rebbe. So if that's the case, I mean, maybe the end of the minting of the penny will hopefully lead to a more expansive and generous worldview. We can only hope. So with that, we've seen the specifics of the penny, its relationship with the Perutah, maybe its utilization in terms of transactions, its role in some lessons, some moral lessons, and maybe even providing a vision for the future.
Rabbi, I'm reminded that my grandfather was wiped out in the crash. A man fell out of a 6-story building and landed on his pishka.
Hopefully, hopefully we will not experience that again, and the end of the penny doesn't mark the end of anything like that.
Right.
But that's so interesting about Rabbi Lamb. It's about like laws, prat el haklal, like, right?
Well, it's whether you want to understand.
Yeah.
It definitely, as he says, it's not a literal interpretation, but it's trying to learn the lesson of what it means to be better off without the Perutah. How can we be better off without the penny?
No, but isn't that an issue of law, of halacha, something with the prat el haklal? No?
No, it's one of the, for those who say the Rabbi Yishmael Omer every morning, it's one of the 13 ways that the rabbis interpret the Torah. If a verse is more general, then is also specific, and it's more general,
Right.
klalu, pradu, klal.
Right.
What you're probably thinking of, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Penny, for all your thoughts. And hopefully next week we will take up we'll see what the pre-Thanksgiving share is all about.
It's another way to make seniors feel badly. That's what happens.
Just a quick question that's kind of not exactly on the topic, but how are electronic transactions influenced by this? Is there any connection at all? I'm thinking of, instead of giving a physical ring at the Kedushin, what if there's an electronic transfer of money? How does that work? Is there?
It has to be present. It has to reach some form of. It has to reach a certain level of ownership, and how when something is more remote, like for example, you can use a shliach as an intermediary.
Right.
It has to be that type of. Does a wire transfer help? Also you don't have the witnesses. You need everything has to be done in the presence of two valid witnesses.
Right.
You probably have to create a very unique scenario where that wired amount can be witnessed that way.
Can be witnessed, right.
But even an exchange that occurs with rings and value, Eliezer was the first. We never heard later that Yitzchak gave Rivka any kind of ring. It was done with Eliezer.
Well, because he was the shliach.
Yeah.
We don't really read about any witnesses there either. I would just like to say, they weren't Jewish, so that's okay. But when we talk now, the halachic requirements would require much more specificity.
I believe it said he gave her nose rings.
Well, yeah, there was a bracelet and a nose ring.
Yeah. But that was Eliezer, right? Not Yitzchak.
Right.
Rabbi, those penny collection books, are they blue?
Yep.
I have the same ones. We'll have to compare our collection.
We'll have to compare.
Did you fill all the circles up?
Some of them. I mean, the truth is, mostly it was my father's. So pretty much I inherited, with his. I don't think I did too many more recent.
You haven't updated it much?
No. I always remember, it was always very cool to get one of those, what they call them, the wheat stalk pennies from before 1950.
The 1909 VDB, that was a big one. All right, we'll compare.
All right. Have a good day and a good week, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.